Hello and welcome to the Just Icelandic channel. My name is Gylfi and I'm the tour guide in this series where we explore Icelandic towns and villages, and I'm not doing it the tourist brochure way. I'm doing it my way and when I feel like it, the brutally honest way. And today's journey takes us to some of the oldest communities in my country. Communities that reflect a certain essence in Icelandic society. So welcome to the villages Hellissandur and Rif. As usual, we start the journey on a map and use Reykjavík for reference. From where it's only little over 2 hours drive to the westernmost part of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, or the Snowy Mountain Peninsula, where the mighty Snæfellsjökull dominates the landscape. And it is a settlement that grew so large during the fishery season that it outnumbered the capital. But today, those communities are the home of little over 300 to 400 people. And Hellissandur is the larger village with around 300 inhabitants. It is one of the oldest fishing villages in Iceland, and its history can be traced back to the 16th century. And few other towns in Iceland have enjoyed such privilege of being so close to good fishing grounds. However, there was never a good harbor around here, so it was often a dangerous struggle to get the fish home to be processed. And as the fishing boats grew larger by time, they were forced to use a better harbor at Rif. So the harbor there is the main reason why this developed into 2 villages. And like elsewhere in Iceland, the regional development has revolved around good harbor facilities. And in the background we have Snæfellsjökull, which is the landmark of the peninsula. And I did actually cover it in a separate video recently, and I recommend that you look at it, since the glacier is so big part of the life and culture on the peninsula. And a bit further to the east we see the landmark of Hellissandur. It is one of the tallest structures in Europe, 412 meters, built in 1963 for the Loran Sea navigation system. But later the Icelandic State Broadcasting Service took it over for the long wave transmitter. And where this mast is, we find very likely the oldest settlement on the peninsula, with ancient remains wherever we look, and names like Camp of the Irish and the Well of the Irish, which is this ancient water source that got lost for decades and found again in 1989 and preserved as it deserves today. And many of those remains date back all the way to the settlement and even earlier. There were some Irish people in Iceland before the Vikings arrived, but it is a controversial issue amongst historians, and actually a story that deserves its own video to be covered seriously, and I might do that later. But I'm only saying now that there are so many things that we just don't know about our country. And this coastline is unfortunately eroding, so measures have been taken to study the archaeological remains before they are washed into the sea, but in some cases it might be too late. And let's move now into town and fly through it. Hellissandur is a friendly town, and there is not much telling us that 300 years ago this was one of the largest settlements in Iceland. The tourist industry has started to leave its mark on the village, and there are artists who have settled here and been decorating some of the buildings. And I have to say that I kind of like this idea, especially since this is a bit old-fashioned. We could have got stuck with Superman or Barbie, but this is way more Icelandic. All we have here is laid-back country people, and the only superheroes are those who catch the fish and make something grow. And this is a good place to inhale the history of Iceland. They do have a maritime museum here. It is not a big museum, but it preserves the oldest existing robot in Iceland. So it's a good place to stop by for some history. And they do have a good campsite and several accommodation options and a small convenience store. This is still just an original Icelandic fishing village. Nothing fancy, just what you see is what you get. And the other village that we are about to visit is called Rif, and it has little over 100 inhabitants. And it takes us only a few minutes to drive there from Hellissandur. But that road can, however, get a bit tricky because this is also the territory of the Arctic tern. And this small and energetic bird comes every year all the way from the South Pole to nest. And this area, it happens to be one of the largest nesting sites in Iceland. So while we drive this road between those villages, we have to keep the speed down. The asphalt, it stores some of the heat into the evening. So those colors on the asphalt are just an experiment or an attempt to see what keeps the birds away, since there are always some people driving too fast. And just recently, I was listening to a man from here sharing his childhood story, and one of the games that the boys played was all about to go into the field where the Arctic tern is, like this boy did, but this clip is actually not from here. But the local boys, they went out there without a helmet. And the name of the game was about to try to come back without getting poked in the head, because these birds, they are very territorial. They attack with everything they got. And one day, this young lad had to go on a bicycle between those towns during the nesting season, and he had this helmet on. It was a bit soft from a foam-like material, and one of the birds poked him and got stuck on his helmet. And this man, he described this experience as very uncomfortable to have this very angry bird stuck on his head for the rest of the trip until his parents could help out. And despite such unfortunate accidents, Rif is a bird watcher's paradise. And just before we enter the town, we can see a shed by the pond, or this nice shelter for guys like me, where we won't get poked in the head while doing our stuff. And the highway continues from here into the village Ólafsvík. I've already covered it. But after we turn left into Rif, this is what we get on the road during the nesting season, where the youngsters are already telling me that this is their town, not mine. And although the amount of birds varies from year to year, it is so much that they literally take over the town. And the noise, it is unbelievable. And the other species do actually want to nest around them, because it's a way for them to protect themselves for predators. Since the Arctic tern, it simply attacks whatever animal that comes around. So it's a totally fearless bird. And for tourists to see this, it's all up to timing, of course. I would say July and into August, it would be the best time. Like this was shot late August 2022. Things are not as wild as in July, when the parents are crazy protective. And I was a bit worried about the drone. I don't like to have birds around when I'm doing my stuff. So I found myself a takeoff spot not within a town, and took off fast and high up, straight away, to get well above them. And it always works fine for me. And filming the town was quite simple. This is the residential area. I didn't have to do many rounds to capture it, but to be brutally honest, it looks a bit cold here. I don't see many trees, and this is open to the north, so it's not so simple to make the trees grow. It's no problem to plant them, but the wind and the salt, it doesn't help. They don't have any campsite here, and there is no swimming pool around. But it takes us only 5 minutes to drive to Ólafsvík, where 1,000 people live, and way more services can be found there. But we can find accommodation here, and some artists changed an old industrial building into a hostel recently, and it shares premises with a theater, international artist residency, and a culture center. And when I checked them on TripAdvisor, they were highly recommended. And I'm not surprised, it's a good concept. However, like in small towns, when you check TripAdvisor, don't expect to see page after page things you can do. If we use that perspective alone, it looks as the most boring town in Iceland. But I prefer to look at the complete Snæfellsnes Peninsula. And what fascinates me the most is, of course, the nature and how many different villages they have. So when I do my round trips on the peninsula, it's never a dull moment. The landscape is always changing, and then we have all those little towns to stop by in. And between the villages, Hellissandur and Rif, not by the highway though, we find this church up on a hill. The hill is called Ingjaldsholl, and the legend has it that in the year 1477, a young man came to Rif on a boat from Bristol in Britain. He had undertaken this trip to study the journeys of Nordic seafarers and spent the whole winter here to do so, and his name was Christopher Columbus. And from the 14th century and until the 18th century, this was the home of one of the largest churches in Iceland, and the church that we have there now was built in 1903, and it is the oldest concrete church in Iceland, and some even say it's the first concrete church in the world. But it's a bit hard for me to buy it, even though it sounds great for Icelandic tourism. But what we know better is that in the 15th century, the English built facilities for salting fish at Rif, the first salt fish facilities in Iceland, and salted fish is still today an important export product. So it was the English that taught us how to do it. But the Danes were also here back then, and Germans and the Dutch. And they were here, not because of the weather, but it was the fish and the money that could be made from it. And that would often lead to conflicts. And the most famous incident around here occurred in the year 1467. The Danish king was trying to keep the English away from trading in Iceland and fishing. But this wasn't going very well for the Danish king, so he sent the local governor to Rif to prevent some business to take place. And the English decided to simplify the business environment and killed the Icelandic governor. And this led to 5 years of conflict, literally warfare between the Danes and the English. But officially this was not a warfare that can be seen in the history books as such. And one of the stories is that the Danes did a deal with the Hanseatic League to seek revenge, and made them do the dirty work for them. But the Hanseatic League was a medieval commercial and defense confederation that originated in Germany, and they helped the Danes to keep the English at a safe distance until the Danes didn't need them anymore, so the Danes got rid of them too, and kept the trading business in Iceland for themselves, and the fish of course. And the story of the battle about the Icelandic fish, is still going on in different forms. And one of the forms is called the modern fish quota system, where we fight each other. And another part of the battle is Iceland's resistance to EU membership. If it wasn't for the fish, we might be in there. So there is a memorial stone at Rif where Björn, governor, was killed. But the settings around the stone could definitely be in better accordance with the importance of this chapter in Icelandic history. But does, however, fit the narrative for the town, or it's more here than meets the eye. That is the best description that I can give you about Hellissandur and Rif. And finally, I want to mention the links in the video description, links to my print-on-demand stores where you can get prints from this town and others, and other ways to support the making of this series where I intend to cover each and every town in my home country. And with that, I'm sending you best regards from the volcano island, Iceland.